This is the Lightning Junkies podcast with your host, Chaz Cryptoson. On this episode of the podcast, we have motherfucking Matt Odell, co-host of the Tales from the Crypt podcast. We talk about why exchanges suck, we talk about BTCPay quite a bit, and we talk about privacy quite a bit. We might throw Lightning in there a little bit too, if we can help it. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to skip all the introductory shit that I typically put here at the introduction. I'm going to put it on the outro. So let's go ahead and jump into the episode. I would like to go ahead and welcome Matt Odell to the Lightning Junkies podcast. How are you doing, Matt?
Very happy to be here.
I'm very happy to have you on here, man. It's everyone knows you from Tales from the Crypt. I've definitely listened to the that podcast quite a bit. I don't really remember exactly how you got into Bitcoin from the podcast. You probably have said it a million times. I probably just missed it. Do you want to just let my listeners know how you got into Bitcoin and that whole thing?
Yeah, so the only time I really ever talked about it on the pod was the first episode I was on. And that was like as a guest, like in the interview series. And then RHR came later, our weekly recap came maybe like 5 months later or 6 months later. I had two friends tell me about it. The first friend told me about it in 2012. He was, it was college. He did way too many painkillers and told me about the Silk Road. And I just scoffed it off. I thought it couldn't really work. The government would shut it down. Someone would shut it down, or the money would be stolen. It just didn't really, the usual scoff. And then in early 2013, I had another college friend tell me about it. And he was like a straight edge nerd. And it was like a completely different type of person to tell me about it. So I was like, oh, maybe something's here. And then there was that first 2013 run where the price went to $250, like really, really quickly from maybe like $30 or something. And obviously that caught my attention as well. And then the rest has just been history. Since then, I've just been trying to figure out how it couldn't work. And that just made me love it even more.
All right, sounds pretty similar to, I think, how I started, Silk Road 2013. When you first jumped into it, did you kind of take the normal path that I think a lot of people take, where you start trading, where you start mining, where you start doing, all the different things that the little space we have here kind of has to offer?
I didn't really, we didn't call it stacking sats back then, but that's kind of how I jumped into it, dollar cost averaging.
Sure.
It was like hard to get Bitcoin. So I was just trying to get some, basically. I did try cloud mining, which no one should ever do. That was a really bad idea. Lost whatever I put into that. I realized pretty quickly that I sucked at trading because I sucked at buying. It felt like almost like every time I bought, like the price dropped in like 2014 and 2015. So I just assumed I couldn't really ever trade. I just ignored that whole aspect. It was always, this seems like the best money we've ever had. I should probably try and get as much of it as possible while still like being responsible. And I think Reddit back then was actually pretty good about instilling that notion into people, that like don't put in more than you can afford to lose, be responsible about it. It was almost more the like 2015 to late 2017 area where everything just got like a little bit ridiculous, where people were saying, trade this shit coin, trade that shit coin, use leverage.
So, I think that's a very interesting contrast comparing the late 2013 run-up to the late 2017 run-up. You're present for both. What other ways would you, really contrast those two different run-ups? I can't really remember too many people from 2013 caring about Litecoin, for example, but I guess we did have something like Dogecoin at the end of 2013.
Yeah, the only alt back then that really anyone was paying attention to was Litecoin. I remember because people were speculating that it was going to get added to Mt. Gox in 2 weeks, and that was like a big source of pump. And clearly, it never got added to Mt. Gox. Mt. Gox went down shortly after. But I remember people saying that, and then Dogecoin did have its moment in the sun there. I remember it had more hash rate than Litecoin at one point, and then they switched it to merge. I don't know. There was some craziness there, but the big difference really was Ethereum. Like once Ethereum pumped, there was just so much money sloshing around that these people who had bought Ethereum had, and I just feel like they just went into everything. There's just thousands of coins. I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that again, but that was. I remember. I mean, during periods of 2017, I was just sitting there. I was just like, "Am I crazy? Like, am I wrong? Is there's this whole new asset class that's blowing up and it's just going to be, $1 billion chains left and right? Is that really what's going to happen? Or is the world going to get tokenized?" And I just thought I was crazy, but fortunately I didn't get fooled by the greed there, and I was able to, protect myself.
Do you think we would have had the run up at the end of 2017 if Ethereum never, existed?
Yes, but maybe it wouldn't have been so extreme. I think I tend to, I don't know about the stock to flow model or whatever, but I tend to believe that like Bitcoin is designed to pump forever. It just, but it's volatile in the short term and it just nets up. Whether that has to do with the halvings and whether they're priced in or not is kind of irrelevant to me. I think the whole system as designed, as more people buy it, it should go up as the new supply decreases. An equivalent amount of demand side should push the price up. So I think we would have went up regardless. Probably not that extreme. The other thing that I think was a big deal was the futures products like the CME and the CBOE adding, because I mean we had there was like 15 days or 16 days above 10K, and it all coincided with if you disregard the most recent run up, but it all coincided with those futures launches, and I didn't expect them to launch. And then I would go against people who say like, oh, the futures product, when they released, they crashed the price of Bitcoin. I think we probably wouldn't have hit 20 or like near 20 if they hadn't launched in the first place, like just the hype of them launching. But yeah, definitely Ethereum brought a lot of attention to the space, and a lot of that went into Bitcoin, but a lot of it didn't, right? So it was definitely an extremely interesting phenomenon. The whole like ICO corruption thing that happened was just really horrible to see, and that was one of the reasons my OPSEC got destroyed, because I was speaking up about it and stuff. There were so many newcomers that came in and they just got like slaughtered on those things, and they were just getting shilled left and right by people who had bags, and it was just really painful to see.
Do you think that we're ever going to see a kind of similar mania to the end of 2017 again?
I don't know, but maybe not. I definitely don't think like this idea of like alt season is the thing. But I also am not the type of person that will say that there'll never be shitcoins. I think there'll always be thousands and thousands of shitcoins, and I think people like trading them because people like to gamble. And I think it's like one of the number one use cases, one of the top use cases of Bitcoin is to then, use it. It's like the reserve asset of this whole shitcoin casino. And, at the end of the day, this is all, well, a lot of it is free open source software. So people can fork it and they can do all these different things. And a lot of them are illiquid. So they end up pumping a lot more. Like we see like all the shenanigans that are going on with Bitcoin SV right now. So yeah, I think we will see lots of pumps and lots of shenanigans, but I think at the end of the day, for like 99% of people, dollar cost averaging Bitcoin will work out better for them. And I think that all these assets, like on the long term, will trend to zero when priced in Bitcoin. And I actually take like even more extreme view. Like I think like real estate and gold and everything else is also trending to zero in terms of Bitcoin.
Well, in terms of Bitcoin, I think I would agree with you there.
Yeah.
Just to kind of double check something here, are there any other chains or tokens or coins or whatever, bullshit term you want to use that piques your interest at all? It doesn't have to be, as an asset or anything that you would recommend to anyone, but just, this has cool technology, whatever.
There's a couple chains that I actively watch that I think they have some interesting things that could be. I think of altcoins kind of as like this test bed. It's basically like a massive bug bounty program that's being run by all these people who are valuing short term over long term. But Bitcoin can take a lot from those real world experiences as we see them. And there's an incentive to break them because there's money on the line. So it creates this pretty interesting phenomenon. Stuff like that we like argued theoretically about why a large block size might be an issue, and then we see it unfolding in Ethereum right now, right? Where you see people are having trouble running nodes. You see the nodes getting centralized, like among Infura and stuff like that. You see what happens when we have like, if there's like a culture where you can just have hard forks all the time. And I think we'll have even bigger lessons there. You know, we saw like stuff like the Ethereum Classic attack where the nodes got eclipse attacked was like really interesting, I think. And I think Bitcoiners can learn a lot from stuff like that. So I definitely like keep an eye on some projects, but as far as like my portfolio is concerned, just a Bitcoin guy. And as far as I never like, I only talk about the ones that are doing really bad things because I don't want to, I don't know, they're just very illiquid and I don't want to, you know, move markets or anything like that.
I think we should go ahead and move on there. I think that's too much talking about non-Bitcoin things and non-Lightning things. We should have more Lightning talk here. So,
Agreed.
something that I'm kind of looking at on my desk here, and I think something that you just recently received as well, is the new Samourai Nodl. Is that right?
Yes, the Nodl Dojo.
Yeah, correct. Have you had a chance to set yours up yet?
Yes, I have. It's very easy to set up. You said you have one too?
Yeah, I just received it yesterday. I have not had a chance to actually do anything with it quite yet.
You got to plug that baby in.
Well, yeah, that's, got it late last night and, I was doing something else. So I was like, I'll just do it sometime today.
You know, it's still like the first gen of the UI software or whatnot because he's just trying to get them shipped out. And he will update them. I mean, do you have the original Nodl?
No, I never got around to getting the Nodl. When I heard that they were building a Samurai version,
Yeah.
I was like, I'll just wait for that. And then, it took a minute for that to happen.
So the original Nodl is great. I've always had great experiences with it, and it's improved tremendously since when I got it. The software, the UI on the new Nodl is a little bit more rough around the edges because his priority was getting Dojo up. So you can run Lightning in Dojo, but he has a lot more updates coming soon. I mean, the crazy thing to me is, from a privacy standpoint, the number one most important thing you can do is use your own node. And like most people are storing on hardware wallets, up until like relatively recently, it wasn't user friendly at all for people to access their hardware wallets using their own node. I mean, I'm sure your listeners know, but the reason why you'd want to do this is because if you're using someone else's node, that node sees all your transactions and your balances and your addresses. They see everything. So like you have a key trusted third party there. And what a lot of people were doing was if you use Ledger or Trezor with their corresponding software, those companies are getting all of your information. And then a lot of people that were more hardcore were using Electrum, but they weren't using it with their own Electrum server. And Electrum servers are expensive to run. So the most people that are running them are probably chain analysis companies. So you're giving it straight to a chain analysis company. So what's really cool about the Dojo, whether that's in Nodl or whether that's using like the Ronin tool or the MyNode now has added it, is that you're literally just scanning a QR code. That's very user friendly, especially from where we were before. I mean, even you can have like, I could have like friends and family scan my QR code and then they're instantly paired with my node. And yeah, they're trusting me, but that's a way different trust model than using like Ledger servers.
I purchased the Casa when it first came out. How would you contrast those two? Because I feel like they have very different philosophies. And my experience with the Casa has been pretty rough the last couple of months. I'm probably not going to get too much into it on the podcast, but yeah, it's not the greatest experience. What would you say on your end?
Yeah, I mean, I was always disappointed with the Casa node. The main issue was that they shipped underpowered hardware, and it really like it hurt the UX because the hardware was so underpowered. It didn't have an SSD. It had an old Raspberry Pi in it. And that's why I've loved my Nodl. I have both the original Casa and the Nodl, and I think the Nodl is fantastic. I mean, the cool part about a Nodl is that it runs like all these different things, right? It runs like BTCPay, it runs LND, and it's all open. Like with the Casa node, you have to use like their app. You have to use their extension. Like everything is siloed. They more like want to be like the Apple of Bitcoin. While like the Nodl is more open platform. It's more like Linux or maybe Android or something. And then the other thing, I mean, with the Nodl Dojo, like they did the exact opposite. They made it like a premium device. Like the Nodl Dojo has two SSDs in it that back each other up that are encrypted, and they have a kill switch in it that if you open the case, it cuts the power so that you need the encryption password to access it. And the reason that's important is twofold, is because our Lightning nodes are holding funds in them. So if someone gets physical access to your device, they can take those funds. And then also, you could do Whirlpool two different ways. You can either on demand mix on your phone, or you can mix all the time and basically provide liquidity, right? Where you're just keeping funds constantly in Whirlpool and remixing them. So you're giving liquidity to other people and you're getting more privacy out of it. In that case, the actual node is holding funds for that too. So it's got two big hot wallets on it. It's got your Lightning hot wallet and it's got your mixing hot wallet. And those funds, like, you got to take that security seriously twofold, which is the double SSDs for backup and if something goes wrong, and then you have the encryption for if someone like actually just grabs the device.
I want to kind of just dig into Lightning a little bit here. I hope I'm not moving too quickly through these subjects.
No, I'm having a great time. Happy to talk about everything.
All right. Talking about the Casa a little bit here, I definitely did when I first bought it. I definitely did like it overall. It helped me to kind of get into Lightning and understand it and everything. Eventually started to move on to using a BTCPay server as like my main like Lightning node, just because the Casa just felt too restrictive, and being able to actually use my Lightning node on the command line was actually very helpful, and just being able to understand how to set fees and stuff like that. How much time have you spent kind of just playing around with your own like LND node, whether it be on the Nodl or some other setup?
I mean, that's how I've learned everything. Like I'm not like a talented programmer or anything. I was actually like bearish on Lightning until maybe like January of last year. And I just jumped in and just started playing around with it. And like, I feel like that's like the best way to learn. That's the best way to get comfortable with anything. And specifically with Lightning, like it's worked really well for what is in effect a beta product. Like it works extremely well from my experiences. And that's what gives me confidence in Lightning as a technology, as a network. Like I was is from using it firsthand and actually seeing it work.
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely. Going to the Lightning conference was an amazing experience because, we had a handful of things you could actually use Lightning in the real world. And hey, it just worked. And there were some hiccups that the Wi-Fi was shit. So it was hard to kind of get bandwidth anywhere. But, when it worked pretty well. Have you actually, kind of talking about, the Lightning conference and you being able to use it in the real world? Have you been able to use it in the real world at any kind of merchants or anything like that?
Like in a physical sense, no, I don't. I mean, maybe I've done payments to people, like direct individuals. But I mean, I think it's really powerful in terms of in-person transactions. But I mean, I still think cash is king. Like I'm an old timer in that regard. But in terms of like online payments, especially coupled with BTC Pay, it's pretty crazy. Like the UX is fantastic and it's so rudimentary still. It's still so early compared to paying with Bitcoin or even like credit card. Like we're already there and they're just getting started. And that merchants can just run this software stack in BTC Pay and they can just process all their own payments globally and not pay BTC Pay a fee or not rely on any trusted third parties is like pretty fucking crazy. We never really had that. Like people would like post addresses and stuff, but we never really had that side of the software stack. And then when you look at it from Lightning, I've used Joule, Willow Burns extension. It was like extremely seamless, or even just using the phone apps with the QR code pops up on the screen and you just scan it with your phone app. That is pretty satisfying too. It's just like you get a green check right away. You don't have to, even the invoice. I kind of like the invoice system. Like now they're talking about getting rid of the invoice system. Maybe we'll have both. But I kind of like that it just pre-populates all my information for me. Even though like I hated BIP 70 invoicing, but I don't know. Maybe I'm a hypocrite there.
Part of the reason why I wanted to have you on the podcast, I think, is I definitely like when you talk about the kind of cypherpunk future, coin joins everywhere, Lightning everywhere. Where do you see things kind of going in the next few years if things kind of take a fairly ideal path in your eyes?
Well, I mean, the ideal path is, I think a key thing here is the U.S. government continue to take a hands-off approach. And if you asked me in like 2015 if the U.S. government was going to ban Bitcoin, just forget what else they do. They just ban it. I would have said it was like pretty good likelihood. And I think that's one of the reasons why the 2017 run was as crazy as it was because a lot of people came to the same realization as me that like all of a sudden like, oh wow, we're getting futures products, we're getting stuff like that. Maybe this won't happen. And the reason I bring that up is because I really do think our biggest UX hurdle is regulatory, right? Like you can build a very pretty product that's easy to use if you're not worried about state resistance. But the second you're worried about like states, different governments coming in and cracking down on this stuff, then that's where the UX needs to be. You basically have to make creative decisions to try and keep a good UX. And like stuff like Breeze has done like a really good job with that, and they have their own trade-offs, right? And they're obviously a centralized company. So like it really comes, but so it comes down to if there's a regulatory crackdown, and if there is, like things could get dicey there for a while. I just think that's less likely than before. What I want to see is like I think it will happen is states will continue to restrict cash usage. It's not my specialty, but like the economy just it seems like it's a little bit out of control. It looks like we're going to go to like negative interest rates and stuff like that. So they're even more likely to restrict cash more. We've seen them restrict it left and right, both for privacy reasons. But I think the ulterior motive that they don't really talk about is because they don't want you hoarding cash or gold in a negative interest rate environment where you're going to be losing money if it's in a bank. So in that situation, I think you'll end up seeing a lot of physical merchants and online merchants spin up their own BTCPay instances to accept Bitcoin because they want to get KYC free Bitcoin. I think the incentive was always in the reverse. Like people thought like, oh, you can just get companies like BitPay to add merchants and then like that'll help Bitcoin because like people will spend there. But like those merchants, they didn't care about Bitcoin. It was just a gimmick for them. They were selling it for USD right afterwards. There's going to be, and you're already starting to see it happen, but there's going to be more and more merchants who want Bitcoin, that they have goods and services that they want to offer, and they have Bitcoin, and they're going to offer discounts if you pay in Bitcoin because they want that Bitcoin so badly and because it doesn't have KYC attached to it. And Bitcoiners will spend there because all the exchanges will be KYC'd and they get a nice discount. There's like all these different thresholds that Bitcoin needs to pass that like when it grows up, as it grows up, and I think like one of the big ones was like getting past Bitmain in terms of ASICs and like getting past SegWit 2x. I think one of these thresholds is really like we need to get Bitcoin to the point where it's like a circular economy. I don't know if you saw, like I had a poll recently on Twitter, and like one of these things is like, one of my main focuses is privacy because I think that's like, if not Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability, it's one of its biggest vulnerabilities. One of the things I get as pushback all the time is like, oh, Matt, like if you care about privacy, like you shouldn't buy through a KYC exchange. But the thing is, like, it's way easier to say that than actually do that. And I think a lot of people say that, but if you want to buy like if you want to buy large amounts of Bitcoin, like you like pretty much are gonna get KYC'd. And the overwhelming majority of people that are buying Bitcoin right now are buying through KYC. And all those people, they're known actors now, right? Like they know their addresses and they know how much Bitcoin they bought. And they can then use all that data, like chain analysis companies, they're basically building these massive data sets where they combine all of that different data and they're able to track transactions that they might not otherwise be able to track through process of elimination. Especially like if you start talking about like major governments, they have all these external surveillance they can do as well, like location, stuff like that, all this different metadata that they're getting from people's phones, facial scans and everything, right? So you mix that all together and they have these massive data sets. And like, so I see Bitcoin being very vulnerable in that regard. And one of the biggest things that could improve that situation, besides specific privacy tools like CoinJoin, is a circular economy. And I think Lightning is going to play a major role there because one of the issues is you could have like great privacy, but then when you spend, that's where you leak a lot of information, is when you spend. Because you spend and it might be linked to an IP address, it might be linked to an email address, a home address or office address where you're getting mailed to. So then you're trusting that merchant with some of that information, and then you usually get toxic change back, and that change is linked. So if you then combine that change with other funds, you can develop some kind of idea of the rest of the person's wallet. And we like obviously we can't be in that situation. We can't be in a situation where you pay someone and they know your salary, like know your net worth. Like that's crazy. And I think Lightning's going to play a big role there. And that was another aha moment I had like a year ago, where I was like, it's still early, and no one should expect that. Lightning is basically, you should operate under the assumption there's no privacy improvement whatsoever right now. But I'm very bullish on it being a big privacy improvement going forward, especially as we have like these multi-path payments. But one thing to keep in mind here is, like, for instance, right now we have 50% of the network is still being run through LN which is like one actor who we don't know who it is. Like that's obviously not great. And then the other thing is, like, we need to make sure, like, we need individuals running nodes through Tor that are independent and they're run by unknown people. And I think that's one of the great things that I really like about the Nodl is I think it's awesome to build your own node, and I I tell everyone they should. It'd be great. My node makes it really easy now, and you learn a lot more that way. But what's really nice about Nodl is the Nodl is a device that you can buy, and you can connect it through Tor, and you could be like a decent sized routing node on the network. You can support the network and make it so, like, we can't have the situation where like the only Lightning nodes running on the network are like Bitrefill, Bitfinex, you know, Ellen Big. We can't have like just we can't we got to make sure we don't hit this like hub and spoke type of situation. And I think everyone can do their part by running a Tor node that's always on. If you're in a country that isn't going to crack down on any kind of Tor usage, which most of the Western world doesn't care about, as long as you're not running an exit node, like, you should do that, and that really helps the network. And it doesn't have to be a lot of money. Like, you can just put in whatever you're comfortable with. It just provides another path.
I think you gave me a lot to kind of unpack there, so I'm going to kind of go back to the very beginning to do that, if you don't mind. You kind of gave me the more idealistic situation there. What if we get the less optimal thing here? What if, the US government, we get someone else in the president's seat who's just like, fuck Bitcoin. I want this thing to die right now, is on TV saying, fuck Bitcoin. It's banned. We're going to go to all our other, friends in the world and make sure they ban Bitcoin too. And we're going to go, and try to put the brakes on it at every single, on and off ramp possible. Could Bitcoin survive in that very adversarial environment?
I mean, I think Bitcoin could survive, but I think Bitcoiners will get fucked hard. And I mean, obviously, it matters where you live, it matters how you acquire the Bitcoin. And it'll definitely slow down. It would slow down Bitcoin tremendously. I mean, this is one of these things is Bitcoin needs time, right? So, like, if Trump gets reelected, that's 4 more years. That's a lot of time in Bitcoin. I don't like talking politics, but I think he's going to win again. And his focus isn't on Bitcoin at all. The game plan it's a simple game plan. Most people are KYC'd already. Governments will just if I was going to attack it, this is what I would do. I would issue a law that said you had to disclose, or a ruling that said you had to disclose all your holdings. They could even go as far as saying, like, give us specific addresses and how much you hold. And then they'll catch some people lying about that, right? Because they have this KYC info, because people aren't using CoinJoin, because people aren't running their own nodes. People aren't, CoinJoin usage is still very low. Lightning usage is still pretty low. Most people are buying on KYC. Most people aren't running their own nodes, and like like Ledger and Trezor, like, I don't think they're logging. I'm not accusing them of logging, but they could be, or they could be forced to, or their servers could get compromised. Like, just think about something like a Trezor. Like, they have people's home addresses, and they potentially have all your addresses and all your balances, right? So all this information's out there. So people will undoubtedly try and lie about it. They'll catch a couple people lying about it, and then they'll do some like show trials. They did this with BitTorrent. They make an example out of a few people, and then they scare the majority into compliance. And then from that point, they know the majority of transactions going through the network. And all of a sudden we get into like really dark areas where, like, they start trying to blacklist transactions and do stuff like that. And that they don't even have to ban Bitcoin in that situation. They could just essentially just ban self custody. Like most exchanges wouldn't let you withdraw, and then if you've already have the Bitcoin, like you have to be giving disclosures every year. That could be. I think that's like the lowest hanging fruit. They could do that relatively easily. Most governments could do that relatively easily. You don't have to be a major government to do it.
Could you see that environment or kind of world actually accelerating Bitcoin development in a certain way, hardening it even more, just because it is in such an adversarial environment?
Well, what I was kind of hoping for was, and it didn't really come to pass, I was kind of hoping for some of these altcoins to get hit so that, you could have like a learning experience without the actual King Bitcoin get hit. But it's weird. Hasn't seemed to happen. I mean, they gave like EOS a slap on the wrist, and like EOS was like it's the ultimate shitcoin. Like that was, I don't know how that got a pass. So it makes me think that at least the U.S. government doesn't make a move, and if the U.S. government doesn't make a move, like it gives us enough cover. But like if you had a bunch of major governments make moves around the same time, and like the Western world was all going after it, and the Chinese continued to go after it, like it would seriously hamper Bitcoin adoption, at least in the short term. Yeah, I mean, it would definitely get priorities straight again about what's important and why these things are built the way they're built. But I think Bitcoiners have a pretty good focus about that already, which is good to see. Stuff like the excitement around BTC Pay. Like BTC Pay is a product that's designed to work in that kind of environment. I mean, it would just completely destroy like the so-called crypto industry. Like they would be fucking done. There's like nothing there that's built for state resistance. Not even like Ethereum. Like Ethereum, like as a network, would probably just grind to a halt. They would just like hit the major players, and just or add KYC just like across the board. Like they couldn't handle that. So I definitely don't think I'm not going to fall into the meme here where I would say this is good for Bitcoin. It's better if there's no moves made. But I think as like responsible Bitcoiners, we should be considering this as a risk. And Bitcoin is a voluntary system here. Like everyone has to take it into their own hands. Like it's going to come down to for individuals, if this type of situation happens, like it's going to come down to individuals protecting themselves and learning about different privacy pitfalls with Bitcoin and how they can improve their own privacy, and just be humble about it and just constantly learn. Otherwise, like you're super vulnerable to your own government like coming after you. And at the end of the day, like what are we trying to do? At least I know what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to accumulate Bitcoin for my future family. And I don't want to lose that Bitcoin.
Do you think BTCPay Server is one of the most important projects in the entire space, period?
Full stop, most important project, without a doubt.
Let's go into a little bit more because we've touched on some pretty good reasons why that is, I think. For example, with my own podcast here, I wanted a way to fund it because at the very beginning I was very anti-sponsor, and now I'm starting to begrudgingly accept the idea of taking on a sponsor. At the very beginning, I was like, hey, I want to be able to accept Bitcoin and Bitcoin over Lightning very easily. I already had a routing node on a BTCPay server, so it was pretty easy to just turn on their crowdfunding thing and just accept Bitcoin and Bitcoin over Lightning through that. What are your kind of real world kind of use cases? I mean, obviously, probably with the podcast there.
Yeah, I mean, so we run BTC Pay at the podcast. We also have ads. Basically, like I completely agree with you that I ideally I would want my own podcast to be no ads, but I think that and just contributor funded. But I think like specifically with Bitcoin right now, it's like sats are pretty cheap. Let people accumulate now, and we can move to a fully contributor model in the future. And it's nice that we have BTC Pay as that option. It's completely self-sovereign. We can't get canceled. Like we saw all this stuff getting canceled on Patreon. Like people's just livelihoods were getting removed for whatever reason through this centralized company. And then Patreon takes a fee too. And like they hold all of your engagement hostage. So BTC Pay obviously provides a massive improvement there. But I think, yeah, any online business, obviously, like it's just awesome and it's so cool that it just goes straight to your hardware wallet. That's exactly what we want. It gives a new address every time. It supports Lightning. It's like pretty easy to use. It's only going to get easier. We'll probably see like a bunch of people offering like hosted BTC pays, which isn't like fantastic, but it's a trade-off. and it'll make it easier to use them. And at least there'll be a lot more competition than just like a single BitPay or a single Patreon. So I think that's a big deal, that it'll foster competition there. And then I also think I think BTC Pay will be like the leading on-ramp and off-ramp for non-KYC Bitcoin users. I think from an on-ramp point of view, it will be merchants offering goods and services and getting paid in Bitcoin. And that's how they will accumulate Bitcoin. Just like we accumulate fiat now, we work and we get paid. And then I think from an off-ramp point of view, it'll be people buying goods and services. And you won't have to go into fiat because you can just buy goods and services with your Bitcoin. And then just to add on top there, I think merchants that have they're overexposed to Bitcoin, they have too much Bitcoin in their BTC Pay. And unlike something like BitPay or even OpenNode, where they have fiat connection, the merchants don't have any fiat connection there. So I think they actually become ideal. They become ideal, almost like ATMs. They're like faux ATMs. And I think I've talked to the BTC Pay guys a lot. They're working on a ton of things right now, but I think it'd be cool if they had it built into it where they're able to sell some of that Bitcoin for cash, like on the spot, and be able to reduce their exposure there. And then the last but not least is, we have this thing, PayJoin, where you do a coin join with the person who's receiving the transaction from you. And the biggest limiter to that is that it's interactive. So the receiver needs to be online. So BTCPay server is always online. It's like an ideal situation where every payment to these merchants can be a coin join. And the nice thing there is the amounts are unequal. So it's got a way better heuristic profile than these coin joins that we see with Whirlpool and Wasabi that are just all equal amounts.
What other projects do you see being on a similar level as BTCPay Server? Is there anything even remotely close without going to the heights of Lightning and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, Lightning's cool. Obviously, I'm bullish on Lightning. I don't really think so. I'm a big supporter of both Wasabi and Whirlpool. I think they're both very important projects. Cautiously optimistic that Join Market is going to get more friendly to use soon. As you can see, I'm very privacy focused. Oh, I'm excited about Justin Moon's Junction project and similar projects there. Just basically, and just HWI and partially signed Bitcoin transactions, because the idea here is that if we can just have a person run Bitcoin Core on their computer, and then they run one other piece of software, and they're able to use multi-sig hardware wallets with their own node, that's pretty crazy. That would be a huge improvement. The current setup where you're using Electrum and you have to run an Electrum server and stuff is just way too difficult. I'm not happy with that. So I think projects like that, stuff we see in the HWI world, the PSBT world, where we're seeing easier multi-sig with your own node, that I want to see more of that. But nothing's on the level, the singular level of BTC Pay. BTC Pay is an absolute game changer in so many different ways. And just watching this developer community grow up around it is just pretty amazing to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many good people over there that, I didn't hear about a couple of years ago. Now they're in there, doing 1 million commits a day. I don't know how many commits a day they do, but they do quite a bit. Really pushing forward this software project on many different levels. I think yesterday I just saw that they added support for Liquid and doing stuff over there. I don't know how much I really care about Liquid, to be entirely honest, but it's something to play with, I guess, and something to look at.
What's your opinion on Liquid?
It's not that interesting to me, to be honest. And I think before BTCPay Server kind of adding support for them, they didn't really have a lot going for them. I don't even know what you could even use that for, other than if you were doing some kind of exchange movement, which I don't really do trades anymore. I basically do what you do and just buy Bitcoin. Sometimes I sell it to play with different technology things, move it on to Lightning. I might sell a tiny bit of Bitcoin to go buy Litecoin, to put Litecoin onto a Litecoin Lightning thing, and then see that there's nothing on there, and then immediately close it out, sell it back for Bitcoin. I don't even know where I was going with that.
The main use for Liquid, it makes a lot of sense to me. I agree with you. Exchange to exchange.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that anyway, the trust model where you have to trust a like a threshold of exchanges, basically, like a majority of these regulated entities that are holding the multi-sig keys is not a bad trust model because you're already just trusting one of them there. But like this whole, I 100% see liquid people would be happy about BTC Pay. It's obviously an improvement on their part. So it's just good to be a part of that software library. But like as a BTC Pay server guy that I like really like BTC Pay, I thought it was a complete non-story that they added liquid. Like I could care less.
Right.
And you know, maybe I'll change my mind if you can easily go in and out of liquid without KYC and without it like a custodian. Because I guess like right now, like if you wanted to do that, you could go through, I guess they're saying like Sideshift AI, or I guess you could even go through Bitfinex because they don't do KYC. But like that's just, I'm past that point. Like my philosophy, I've seen so many exchanges fall down that my philosophy is, you know, any money you put in an exchange, like if you deposit money into an exchange, like you just assume it's gone at that point, and then you're just happy if it comes out the other side. Like you should just be grateful that you got it back. I just assume it's lost.
I mean, on the subject of exchanges, they're there to make money. They're not there for some ideological reason. They're not there for Bitcoin. They're not there for, any of those other things, which is fine. They're there for whatever business they want to do. I definitely don't like certain companies that would say that they're a Bitcoin company, and then they're adding a lot of very specific shitcoins that don't really make sense within that context. So at what point do you kind of judge that all of that to be bullshit?
Yeah, I mean, I view it from the same point as you. I assume they're greedy actors, which you basically should just assume everyone's a greedy actor. That's one of the beauties of Bitcoin, is that it operates under that assumption. And I actually, in terms of specifically, I mean, I think what you're talking about is a bunch of these exchanges are about to go like whole hog into the proof of stake bullshit. They have a direct incentive to pump it because they want people to stake with them. It gives them more influence over the network. And if they have more money on the platform, like people will be more likely to trade in the casino and use like additional revenue generating products for them. So like we've actually seen like with Binance offers for Tezos, and this is a perfect example of how I watch other chains to like learn things. They offer Tezos more return if you stake with them than if you stake with your own node through like the delegation process. So they're basically taking a loss on that just to get you in the door. Then they become one of the main validators of the chain. Then they get to sell you all these other revenue generating products. I'm not going to support it. I won't support those exchanges, but I'm not going to necessarily hold it against them because it's clear revenue generation. And then same on the privacy front. Like these exchanges, they're regulated entities. And if they're not regulated entities, they have huge targets on their back. And they're going to try and cover their ass. And they're going to use these chain analysis companies and whatnot and log all your information and take all this information to cover their ass. And they're going to share it with these parties. So Bitcoiners need to put themselves in a situation where they can't do that to us, where they can't, we already are in the situation where they can't take our coins if you just don't keep it on exchanges. And we need to be in a situation where they can't take our privacy as well at the same time. Exchanges shouldn't be able to track all of our past and future transactions. They can. And do I hold it against them? I mean, a little bit, yeah, but like they can, so they are. And a lot of them are being forced to. So we need to make it so they can't.
I mean, I would agree with that. I think a bigger criticism, and I think it's hard to fault them per se for it, I guess, but is just the fact that a centralized exchange is limited in their ability to help all customers at all times. They sent something to a wrong address or, what have you.
Right.
Because it's a centralized exchange, it's not a straightforward process just to give it back to the customer. It takes real work, for them to go in and, do something about it.
Yeah. Or look at like Quadriga or Mt. Gox or whatever. You like try and sell a top and then you end up with nothing, so I like the nice conservative approach. Just, try and eliminate trusted third parties as much as possible. And that means I just avoid exchanges like the plague. Whatever, I have my one trusted on ramp, I use it, I withdraw it to my own wallet, I coin join, and I move it to cold storage, and that's that.
Are there any improvements coming down the line that you would see as better than the exchange model? I don't know if these are actual improvements, but I just want to throw out a couple names. I like SparkSwap. I know that they're not necessarily private per se, but I really like how easy it is just to, move money onto Lightning and, maybe something like BISC, or anything like that. Do you have more optimal ways to purchase Bitcoin than, maybe using Coinbase or any of the larger
Well, so Spark Swap is interesting. As we talked about earlier, I think Lightning does provide some interesting privacy benefits, or at least it will in the future. I'm not sure if we're there yet. And you are giving a bunch of information to Spark Swap. They do know your node information, so they know your public capacity, I think. Obviously, any transactions you send through their channels, they see and could be logging if they wanted to. They do have KYC information. I was super excited for Spark Swap, but I haven't tried it because I didn't want to do the KYC because it was with some like random third party. Or I guess not random, they're like a known third party, but I didn't know them, so I just didn't feel comfortable with it. Personally, like I think if you do use KYC exchange, like you should just pick one that you like maybe trust a little bit more than the others, because they're all sharing the information, but they're not all going to get their information stolen or leaked and stuff like that, right? So you try and limit your KYC exposure as much as possible. So I unfortunately have not been able to play with SparkSwap, but it seems very interesting. The whole idea of on-ramping directly onto Lightning makes a lot of sense to me. BISC is great. It's hard to use with large amounts. The issue here is always the fiat side, right? It's the choke points are always on the fiat side. You're sending bank transfers, you're connecting to bank accounts, and fiat sucks. Like that's why we're here. So they're able to crack down. Governments are able to crack down on that side. And when they're not able to, in certain situations like with BISC and stuff, then they do like undercover stuff to try and make examples of people. We saw that on local Bitcoins, where they will do like cash deals with people, and it'll be undercover, and then they'll hit them with some related offense for that, and just try and scare other people not into doing it. I mean, I come full circle. We're back. Like BTC Pay. Like I think BTC Pay is going to be the main way. Obviously, people can mine. That's always a good way to get non KYC Bitcoin. But depending on your electricity costs, you're going to pay like a 30-40% premium over if you bought it. So that's not really that good of an option. So like you accept Bitcoin for goods and services, you give them a 15% discount if they pay with Bitcoin. And basically to the merchant, they're paying a 15% premium to not KYC when they get their Bitcoin.
I mean, I think that's, definitely a way to get Bitcoin. I think the other way to get Bitcoin is to tell your sponsors to pay you in Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, but that's the same thing, right? It's you're a merchant. It's goods or services. In this case, it's the podcast.
Still talking about Lightning, something that I was thinking about before, let's say, because this is something that's kind of fresh on my mind, is the idea of if someone were to take the kind of philosophy of Samurai's Bitcoin wallet and kind of bring that to Lightning. I feel like there are a lot of little things that people could do right now to make a much more privacy-focused Lightning experience. Do you have any opinions on that?
Yes, 100%. I love that idea. That's what I think. I think right now, like, look, most Bitcoiners understand that we have a trade-off between being able to verify the supply and privacy. And I think one of the best balances we can have here in the short term is people run their own nodes, they coin join, and then they fund Lightning channels with coin joined outputs, and obviously that on their own node that they're running through Tor. And ideally there's like a mix of private channels in there, but I also think there should be some public channels because you should help with routing. Because just from the most basic principle of there's no toxic change there, that coin selection is such a pain in the ass. So if you have all this toxic change, you're going to inevitably, especially as fees rise, you're going to inevitably relink that with the rest of your wallet. So if we can make it so it's easy enough that you can just coin join with your own node and then you move it into Lightning, that'd be pretty great. I don't know if it necessarily has to be integrated. I mean, if we're talking about like a private way to KYC, a more private way to KYC, if you have something like GetBidder in Europe where you give them an XPub, right? And when you send them a bank transfer, they're non-custodial. They just automatically send it to your XPub to a new address. You can give them a Samourai. You get a fresh Android phone. If you have an old one, then it's really cheap. But even if you have to get a new one, you like drop $200 on a new one. You install Samourai Wallet fresh. You link it to your Dojo. You put the XPub into GetBidder. Every time you send a bank transfer, it goes to your Samourai Wallet premix. And then you just click the mix button on the app because they're about to roll out mobile mixing, you click mix. And then when it's gone through a couple rounds, then you just like open Zap or whatever you're using to manage your Lightning node, and you just deposit it into there and open a channel. That's pretty clean, especially since like most people are using a like a desktop computer for actually interacting with their node. But I mean, you could even presumably, I mean, then you're going into like Android trust models, and like maybe you should be using graphene and stuff. But it all comes down to your threat model. But you could have like Zeus or Zap on your phone, and then you don't even need a computer. You could just, right after you mix on Samourai, you just plop it right in there and open a channel. But if it got integrated, that would be fucking awesome. Just like mix, open, good.
Yeah, exactly. Like having that to be a one experience, you don't even have to think about it. Coin joins happen in the background before you open channels, or what have you. And I don't know what other improvements could happen, but I have the intuition that there's things available out there in Lightning Land that aren't being utilized right now that could be utilized for privacy things. I can't pull on that of my ass right now, but it's kind of my intuition that there's things being left on the table at the moment.
And there's tons of things left on the table, and I'm actually kind of like an idiot when it comes to that stuff too. I mean, the big one though, I would say, is like in the short term is multipath payments, because then your payments being split up through multiple different nodes on the way to its final end destination. So that seems like a significant privacy improvement to me. So I think that'll be a big deal. But I think, like I said, like we really need to watch the things individuals can do. Is they should be running Tor nodes, they should be running Lightning Tor nodes, and help the network. And then other things is like routing improvements, like the way that it chooses routing. Like it shouldn't be on like lowest fee. There should be a privacy component there where you want more hops. Little things like that should significantly improve it. And I just go back all the way to earlier in the conversation when we were talking about, will a crackdown help Bitcoin? There is a bright line to this, to that, that negative possibility that I pointed out, is that if there is a crackdown, like all of a sudden making sure that it's easier to use Bitcoin privately becomes a massive priority if people are being made examples of, and if governments are cracking down. Just ideally, the ideal situation in that kind of situation would be that it wasn't, a major world power who's doing it, so that we have a little room to move there. Because otherwise it's the US or like Western Europe, like it could get really dicey like really quickly.
And I think I want to move on a little bit here to maybe touching on the closed loop or the circular economy here. But I think for a lot of people, Bitcoin's a hard sell. Bitcoin and dealing with all the complexity kind of involved is a hard sell. How do we, get more of the closed loop economy or circular economy started? One way that I like to bring up with guests on here is the marijuana industry. That if you go down to a dispensary in a state that has it legalized, and I've had a lot of conversation with these people for reasons, they all seem to know what Bitcoin is, and they all seem to have a good reason why they don't accept Bitcoin, or at least in my experience they do. The ones that I've talked to have said that I can't pay my vendors in Bitcoin, so if I can't pay them in Bitcoin, what's the point? I need to convert it to cash anyway. So whatever, just give me cash. And that made sense to me. If, we could convert their vendors, and if we could convert the vendors of the vendors, and turtles all the way down, we could, build something, and then the marijuana shops could actually accept it directly. Then, the employees could get paid in Bitcoin, people could come in and pay in Bitcoin, and then, round it goes. How do we actually make that more of a reality?
I mean, it's very much like a chicken and egg situation. For the vendors to accept Bitcoin, they need to have people that are willing to pay them Bitcoin. There's no easy solution there, but I think what happens is, like, I think over time, our traditional system, like we currently live in like a financial panopticon, and they're pushing it harder and harder. And the easiest people to convince right now are at the fringes. You get your Patreon closed, you get your PayPal frozen, you get bank accounts closed, or like your currency devaluates, and there's rules about how much money you're allowed to move out of the country. Like you have these situations that arise because the traditional system is broken, and it's centralized, and it's prone to corruption. And those things will naturally increase Bitcoin adoption. It's the same reason Bitcoin has been successful. Like if we didn't need a censorship resistant money, Bitcoin never would have been successful. Like why would you deal with the trade-offs of that Bitcoin has if you could just instantly send money through Venmo and have no issue? That would, it would never happen. So I think people just need to not expect the world to happen so quickly. I think it'll be like more of a slow and steady kind of grind, and then one day it just will be. And on, but on a more short term note, like that's one of the reasons why I like this idea that like BTC Pay merchants can then sell Bitcoin for cash, because then it kind of jump starts that chicken and egg because they can both get cash and it's like an extra revenue generation for them, like people coming in to buy some, small amounts, like buy $20 worth of Bitcoin, buy $30 worth of Bitcoin, and maybe they'll buy some milk while they're there or something else.
While you were saying all that, what I was kind of picturing in my head was, the state of the internet and maybe even the state of the world was 10 years ago, roughly around when Bitcoin was created and was released. How different are things going to look in 10 years? Not even thinking about Bitcoin specifically at the moment. How different will content creation, people monetizing themselves, all that? I feel like all of those different things have been transformed in the last decade, like tremendously. And I think, with BTC Pay and other things, kind of, they're, like you were saying, they're very new still, even as good as they are, they're still very new and in their infancy. In 10 years, are we going to look back and laugh at how absurdly infantile we all were with what we had like right now?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's impossible to really fathom what the next 10 years will bring. If you just look back at the last 10 years, you can see that. And you like mix, we add censorship resistant money to the mix. You just make Bitcoin's the best money we've ever had. It's just part of that mix, and everything that goes around that happens around it. At the end of the day, like money rules the world, right? And Bitcoin's a better money, and it's inherently digital. It's like an actual digital bearer token. Like that's insane. People will gravitate towards this better money, especially as more things go digital. So I think like to speculate, people talk about like machine to machine payments and stuff, like my dude, Bitcoin sign guy, like he talks about, like onion routed drones, self-driving cars, and like it's so much easier for them to get paid in Bitcoin. They can verify it, they can run their own nodes and they can verify it and actually confirm that, they actually got money transferred to them. So it's like just really, I don't make predictions that far out. I think overwhelmingly people aren't idiots, and especially when it comes to their own success and their own livelihood, and they'll gravitate towards this. They'll just realize that it's a better option, and they'll be removed from other options. Like it'll start with the people that have no other option, and then it'll go inward.
How or should we bring people into the mix? I have a certain buddy who at the very beginning of me getting into Bitcoin, he bought some too, sold it at the wrong time, bought it at the wrong time, got really salty, etc. And has always kind of resisted, me talking about it after that. So I would bring up some cool wallet or some cool thing that I'm, super into, but he's like, cool, thanks, Chaz. I really appreciate it. It's really awesome about your whatever bullshit you're talking about today. Have you kind of experienced that? Has that been common in your life? And is that something that we should overcome, or something that we should just accept and not focus on and just do what we do and hope that eventually people come to what we've built in Bitcoin land?
That's like pretty much been my whole experience in Bitcoin has been what you just described. Until recently, when I actually started like going out and meeting actual Bitcoiners all the time. And now it's just like a ton of people that also had shared that same exact experience, because inevitably these people always don't listen to you, and then they buy the top of the next speculative mania, and then it goes immediately down, and they either sell at that point and get wrecked, or then they stay around. And I had a couple of people stay around. There was this one friend from middle school and high school who I convinced her in the 2013 run. I had been talking about Bitcoin from like $150 all the way up to like 1100, right? And she bought like on like the day before the top. She bought it like she finally she was like, nope, match full of shit, match full of shit, match full of shit. But she was checking the price, like everyone, like they're always checking the price in the background. And she told me after the fact, she's like, yeah, I bought. And then it just went down for like 2 years. It just went down. And I think like most people will come in at tops and some will get dissuaded and some will stick around. And then the next speculative mania happens and the same thing will happen over again. Because at the end of the day, the price, at least in the developed world where we don't have as much financial censorship happening, that's going to be the main driver of adoption and people coming in is these pumps, is where they come in. And my goal nowadays is everyone that's close to me knows I love Bitcoin. They know I'm dedicated to this. Like I've dedicated like a decent chunk of my life to this. When the time comes that they're ready, like they'll know to reach out to me. They know to come to me. So I don't have to come to them anymore. I think that's the best way to do it. You give them like a light introduction, and if they're not interested, then you just wait, and they'll either be interested or they won't be. Like you can't like we're not going to convince everyone, at least in the beginning. It'll take time. Everything will take time, and you just do it lightly.
I think I want to move on from the topic of Lightning here and briefly talk about your podcast, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely.
Do you want to go ahead and let the listeners know, as if they don't already know, but let's put on the pretense that they don't know what podcast that you co-host there, but you just want to let them know what it is and all that.
So we have this podcast, Tales from the Crypt. TFTC.io is our website. You can search Tales from the Crypt in your favorite podcast app. It was started by my co-host, Marty Bent, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 2.5, I don't know, a while ago. And it's, the normal format interview series that we see a lot in the Bitcoin world, where he just interviews very interesting people in Bitcoin. And I've been very lucky to join him in those interviews. And then at the same time, we have this rabbit hole recap, which I started with him. And that was like a year and a half ago. I started that with him, and it lives in the same channel. And that is a weekly news roundup, but without all the bullshit. There's no like shit coins and stuff, unless like it's a learning experience for Bitcoin. There's just no noise, none of the blockchain, not Bitcoin bullshit, no ICOs. We do have sponsors, but we pick them very, very carefully. We just talk from the hip. Like I just call it as I see it. I don't have, one of the nice things is I still have like a full-time fiat job. So I don't really have a horse in this race besides my Bitcoin bags. So I'm not trying to, shill bad product. I use things and then I talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of been one of my operating rules is even if I ever do take on a sponsor, it's pretty much going to be me approaching the sponsor saying, hey, I like your shit, let me shill it for money, please. Have you considered having your own kind of podcast where you riff on various topics or, do your own kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, look, I love Marty. Marty's like a brother to me, and I would love to just grow Tales from the Crypt with him. So that's the path I'm leading right now. But I'm always open to other opportunities. But like, yeah, I ideally want to have a show on Tales from the Crypt. That's like my show. So then we'll have the traditional Tales from the Crypt interview series. I don't know, maybe video content. I've been exploring a bunch of different things. We recently launched. Marty has this daily newsletter that he's been writing for 3 years, which is insane. Just this idea that he writes about Bitcoin every morning on every weekday for 3 years. I could never do that. But I just added to that. We have this, we call it the SAT Standard, which is a weekly newsletter that goes out on Saturdays. Like that's my baby. Like I put that together. So that's been fantastic to do. But yeah, like maybe I'm not even sure though if who knows? Like you don't really know till you try it, but I'm not sure if I'm that good of an interviewer. I just like talking about Bitcoin. So like Rabbit Hole Recap is like my absolute baby. I love doing that every week. It's just fun.
To be fair, I think there's various interviews that you do that end up being really, really good because you're there, because you add this kind of your certain flavor. I think Marty's very different and has his own kind of flavor. Like, for example, the American Hodl interview. I mean, that one was fucking ridiculous, but I think it's because you all had this ridiculous flavor going on in it, and it melded very well. So I my personal opinion, I think if you had that going on your own, it would work pretty well. But hey, I'm not here to push you into your own podcast here.
I'll tell you, I love joining for the interviews. It's fantastic. The American Huddle episode was ridiculous. We had the Arbed Out episode was ridiculous. We just recorded one with Andrew Chow, which I was super happy to be there for. There was a little bit less of my flavor there, but I was very big on making sure we talked about coin selection, which is something that I hold near and dear to my heart. And we had a really good conversation about that. But yeah, I would be lying if I said I haven't been considering it. It's just honestly, I feel like since I've jumped into Bitcoin head first, I mean, I guess I've always, but I ramped it up in 2017, like late 2017, 2018. There's not enough time in the day. I'm like playing with all these toys. I'm already recording RHR for this like 3 hour. It's a 1 hour recording, but like between going to the studio and talking beforehand, talking afterwards, that's like 3 hours there. And I want to do more guide videos and stuff like that. So there's just really not that much time in the day. So it's just, but that's good. That's a good issue to have. But I definitely see a future where I do some of my own shit more. Just because also I just like, doing my own shit. Like that's just one of the reasons I love Bitcoin. We get to, be our own bank. Like that's fantastic.
I mean, agreed. I guess my perspective is a little bit different. I haven't had a full-time income for quite a while. So, part of the reason why I started my podcast was like, I have all this free time. I need to be doing something to be kind of useful. I have no idea if this podcast is useful in that sense. I think it is. And I've been doing it long enough that quite a few people have said that it's helpful, that other people have said that they've gained information from it. But after a while, you're doing something like, doing a podcast, and then you're like, well, what else can I do? And I think, very naturally, I've been kind of going to the same place that you've been going of, I'll do video content. I'm not clear on, where I want to do video content. I've just kind of reorganized my entire apartment to make it easier for me to shoot video content, even though I have no idea what I'm going to do. That's kind of how I do things. But do you see this kind of something similar that you're like, I'm sitting here, I have this time, I want to do something for Bitcoin, put more value out there? Is that something you actively think about?
Yeah, I mean, look, this week, so I still have my fiat job, right? This week, I flew to San Francisco. I helped them with the Human Rights Foundation workshop. Then I flew back. That was late last night. Then I had 2 calls talking with about Bitcoin with different companies in the space that wanted some advice with things that I pushed them off to today because I was in San Francisco. And then I jumped on this podcast with you because I really like going on the other podcasts in the space I like. I think that's like a really good way of just building quality content everywhere. I'd love to see that. And the workshops in general have just been super rewarding. We've done Evan Kalutis. He just had a great episode with you. Everyone should listen to that episode if they haven't. And Josh in New York, Beefsteak Josh. He's a waist slice on Twitter. We've been running these Bitcoin Citadel workshops. Be your own Citadel. We started with Cold Card and Coin Joins and using it with your own node. I think we're going to do like a build your own node workshop. And that's just like super rewarding. Like I think like, just hands-on meeting with Bitcoiners. It's just fantastic. And I just really, really love that element. I just love going to dinner and drinking with Bitcoiners too. That's really fun. Yeah. So I basically every day I'm just thinking about how I can give back to Bitcoin because this community has given me so much and it's just really rewarding. And that's just like, no matter what, like that's basically that's my plan until number goes up to the point where I can just disappear in the woods somewhere. That's like the goal of life right now.
Have you given much thought to, taking whatever action you can to getting some kind of Bitcoin income and dropping the fiat job entirely?
Yeah, I mean, that's where it's going to get interesting, right? Because like that's what I want Tales from the Crypt to be. Like I want Tales. I think like me and Marty are building something really special there, and like ideally we could get to the point where that could just be my full time, and then I could do all this other stuff on the side. And just in general, like I'm constantly looking for opportunities to work in the Bitcoin space. In the past, like the past bear cycles, I just saw so many people who went full-time Bitcoin just get wrecked. They got absolutely wrecked. And in the bear market, it's like really nice. It's just really nice having a completely independent salary in the bear market. That is a underrated benefit to be in that situation. I mean, we saw someone like Andreas who, when I got involved in Bitcoin, I would just like mainline his videos. I would just like watch his videos and then market buy Bitcoin. And then he had like no Bitcoin in 2017 because he was living off of it, and it was like it dropped to $150, and he was just selling it for pennies because he had to live off of it and he didn't have any fiat on the side. So I was always very conservative about that, and I will admit that there was a couple opportunities I had like late 2017, early 2018, like at the top, to move into Bitcoin full time, and I'm very, very grateful that I didn't do that. I'm in a much more stable situation now, so I do see. I said earlier I don't want to make 10-year predictions, but like in the next like 2 years, like I'm going to be full time Bitcoin. Next 3 years, I'll be full time Bitcoin. I'm just completely done with my fiat job. There's like no passion there whatsoever. It just pays the rent and makes it so I can accumulate more Bitcoin.
Let's think about the listeners for the moment, because I think at one point all of us were, thinking about what we could do in Bitcoin or for Lightning, really inspires us, etc. What would you say to the listener out there that is like, I want to help, but I can't do XYZ because I'm not good enough at whatever, the case might be. If I'm not good at programming, or I'm not good at, content creation, or whatever it is, would you encourage them to do it anyway, or to try to make something happen either way?
Well, what I would say is, I mean, you should focus on yourself first. It's like the when you fly an airplane and they give you the instructions on if the masks fall out of the plane, you're supposed to like put yours on first, and then you put on other people's masks. I think you should be greedy, and you should just keep learning for yourself, and Bitcoin's an interesting beast where the more educated Bitcoiners we have, the more Bitcoiners that are doing best practices and are aware of everything, the stronger Bitcoin is. So you are inadvertently helping everyone else by helping yourself. And to go even further there, like if you have a business, right, and you want to accumulate Bitcoin, like you start accepting Bitcoin, you're helping boost that circular economy for yourself. You're just helping yourself. So I think that's really important. The meetups are really important. Tread carefully in terms of privacy and stuff, but it's just been a huge net benefit for me. We have a great community in New York. Just talking to people in real life, like in person, but just in general, like the Telegram groups, Twitter to an extent. Like, don't let it get to your head. Don't be an asshole. But yeah, do what you can and just don't lie. And then it doesn't matter. Like if you like, don't get overwhelmed and don't think you have to be perfect. No one's perfect. Everyone's just trying their best. We're all just trying our best. And people see that. Like if you're actually acting ethically and whatnot, there's no harm in like creating content if you want to create content. But I wouldn't like just jump right into it. I would focus on myself first. Like, ask what Bitcoin can do for you and then take that to the next level.
So I don't know how much longer you want to be on here. I typically don't do the 3 hour long interviews on Lighting Junkies.
Was that a dig at me? Because I'm kind of known for my epic podcasts.
I wouldn't call it a dig, but I believe it is true, though. Yes.
Well, the key for those is you got to enter bourbon into the mix,
Ah.
and then at hour 2 it gets really interesting.
I kind of like the business, not business, but the kind of podcast talk a little bit. Self inspiration there and self sufficiency is, I think, a huge part of Bitcoin land, and something that I think I really latched on to when I started really getting into Bitcoin is being self sufficient, taking care of yourself. I'm in my 30s, and I really didn't do a good job of getting those skills in my 20s, and I've been doing a lot better in my 30s. Something that I pointed out recently was cooking. Like I'm dating someone that is a professional cook, so it's hard for their skills not to rub off. And it's like, I think, obviously a lot of Bitcoiners are into their carnivore ways or whatever, but I think just being able to cook in general is hugely important. Do you think that there are any other skills besides cooking that lend themselves to being self-sufficient and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should just like life's important, Like it's easy to get like wrapped up in being obsessed with Bitcoin, and I'm 100% guilty of it. You also have to take care of yourself in general, and you have to appreciate what you have, and family, friends. It's like super important, take like exercise, like people should exercise. I personally, like, my favorite form of exercise is like competitive sports. And so I play soccer, I play tennis. I just enjoy. That's part of the reason why I like Bitcoin, I guess, is just because it's like a global competition. And yeah, I think that it's easy to get way too wrapped up in this stuff and forget about what's really important. And I'm not trying to discount Bitcoin because I fucking love Bitcoin. I think it's the best money we've ever had. But at the end of the day, like, your life is way more important, and it's really fucking short. So you got to enjoy it. And I think people should just both take life a little bit more seriously and a little bit less seriously, because we got a lot of zombies out there just walking around, not really thinking about shit.
Well said. I think that's as good a place as any to close out the episode, man.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoy your podcast. And I just know that when I first got into it, one of the reasons I did it was because I felt like there just wasn't good enough content out there for Bitcoiners. And I felt like it was something I can improve on. But right now, it is absolutely fucking bullish. There's an amazing amount of content out there. And you're a main part of it. So thank you for that.
Well, I really appreciate you saying so. I mean, that's pretty much why I started this podcast. I was getting obsessed with all the stuff happening in Lightning, and obviously different people were focusing on parts of it sometimes, but since Bitcoin is such a big world, a lot of it was more on Bitcoin itself and not necessarily on Lightning. So, hey, why not have a podcast that is only Lightning and talks about how obsessed we all are with this technology.
Fucking love it.
I wonder how many other people would describe themselves as being obsessed with this technology. I'm not sure if it's unhealthy or not over here.
Number go up. The amount of people obsessed is going up, man.
Do you want to give the spiel on how people can find you on the internets and all that?
I'm at Matt _Odell on Twitter, and our podcast and newsletters you can find at tftc.io, or just search Tales from the Crypt on your favorite podcast app.
Well, once again, man, I appreciate you joining me, and we'll catch you later.
Awesome. Take care, dude. Thank you.
Boom. That was the 20th episode of the Lightning Junkies podcast. 2120 on 2020 or something. I think that's correct. Hopefully you learned something on this particular episode. We had a very fun conversation, and I feel like it flowed very well. I'll definitely have Matt on again in the future for his insights and just general knowledge about things related to Bitcoin privacy and things similar. If you would like to support the podcast, you can do so with Bitcoin or Bitcoin over the Lightning Network directly at crowdfund.lightningjunkies.net. There are also other ways to support the podcast monetarily, including Fold, LNCast, and tipping.me. You can also support the podcast without having to use any of your monetary sovereignty. You can leave a review on whatever podcast aggregator program that you might use. You can also share the podcast on social media, especially the twitter.com. Don't forget to subscribe and give me feedback so I can continue to improve the podcast. I think you lovely folks are probably sick of hearing my voice now, so we will leave it there. I invite you all lovely folks, all of you lovely folks, to join me. Please join me. I'll see you on the Lightning Network. The Lightning Network is the best video game ever.